Welcome to the TTS Talking Educators podcast. Each week, we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe, offering exclusive insights, inspiration, and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in the primary and early years. Hello, my name is Mark Loveday, your host for this week's TTS Talking Educators podcast. I'm the headmaster of Fruin College, an independent co-educational day and boarding school for students aged 7 to 19, specialising in dyslexia and co-occurring specific learning difficulties. I'm a specialist teacher, an SLE, a specialist leader of education for SEND, and have taught across primary, secondary and sixth form in both mainstream and specialist settings, holding a variety of leadership roles. I've previously set up and led SEND advisory teaching services, have been responsible for the creation of diagnostic pathways for dyslexia, dyscalculia and dyspraxia, and created and led an alternative provision for students experiencing emotional-based school avoidance, which went on to win Alternative Provision of the Year in 2023. I'm a board director for the SBLD Assessment Standards Committee, SASC, a trustee of a multi-academy trust, and I'm a national and international speaker. Throughout this series, we'll be discussing a range of topics aimed at supporting SEN in primary schools, inspiring you with guidance and resources to enhance your practice. I'm delighted to introduce Beccie Hawes as today's guest and to welcome you back. Hello, Beccie, how are you?
Hello, thank you for having me back. I'm very well, and how are you doing?
I'm brilliant, thank you, and it's fantastic to have you back, and thank you for coming back. Before we get started, could you give a quick introduction about yourself for our listeners?
Of course. So I'm Beccie Hawes, the proud CEO of Cadmus Inclusive. We're a not-for-profit organisation based in Walsall in the West Midlands, and we offer a range of holistic services to schools, ranging from SEND advisory work, counselling, sports mentoring, speech and language therapy, and to support dogs. So we're 5 years old now. And in my free time, I am also an author of particular SEN books. I've developed resources to support SEN students in the classroom, and I've got 4 sons.
Amazing. Where do you find the time? I can't believe, I know I said it on the last episode, but I can't believe Cadmus is 5 years old. Where's that gone? Where has that gone? So today, in this episode, we're going to discuss how to support communication challenges with children with autism. So if we could kind of start with kind of the common challenges, both verbal and non-verbal, people might present with.
So I think an interesting way of looking at this is about having a mismatch. So for lots of our autistic children and young people, they find social communication to be a really, really big challenge. And I think that's because we've got lots and lots of unspoken rules that we're just expected to abide by. And for our children and young people with autism, they know what those rules are, but they have to kind of be taught or practiced or rehearsed or processed very, very carefully. I think a nice way of explaining it is a child I came across recently who had a speech and language therapy assessment where the speech and language therapist had shown him pictures of lots and lots of social situations and asked him to make some inferences about how people were feeling, what's the appropriate way of responding. And he got them all right. And she sort of looked and said, I don't know why you're here. And his response as a 10-year-old was fabulous. He thanked her very much for the lovely pictures, but explained that life on the playground was much harder. The pictures meant he could sit and look at them for ages and work out what to do by a process of elimination. Can't be sad. Face doesn't quite match. Think it must be happy because that means I do this. So here's my answer. But he said in the playground, everyone else is 10 gestures ahead, 10 facial expressions ahead, and the game has moved on. So I think sometimes life is a fast thing. And for our autistic children, it's much harder. For our non-verbal children, I think part of the difficulty there for me is that sometimes there's an assumption that just because you don't speak, you have nothing to say. When actually these children have an awful lot to say and will tell us and communicate with us. We've just got to be good at listening in a different way.
Absolutely. I think, it comes back around to kind of old saying, just like 2 ears, 1 mouth,
Absolutely.
More listening and less talking. And I think you're absolutely right. It's the way that they are communicating with us through either language or body language.
Yeah. And I think we also have to understand that some autistic children, and not just autistic children, process language in a very different way. We're seeing an increase because we're more aware now of children and young people that are called what's called Gestalt language processors. And those children take a whole language approach to their development as opposed to single words that we build up into sentences. Yesterday, I got to see a fantastic young man who was communicating via the means of Horrid Henry. So every time somebody had done something good, he used one of his Gestalt scripts of "Nice one, Henry," from the cartoon. And that's his way of communicating. "You've done well. I'm really happy for you." Other people dismissed it as, "Oh, here he goes again. It's the script." But actually, that's meaningful communication. We've just got to recognise it, honour it, and respond appropriately.
And that's a really interesting one, because how would you then differentiate for colleagues listening in? How would you differentiate between, Jim, we both heard it where they go, "Oh, that's their special interest." We're trying to get something out. What would your advice be for educators in terms of that not necessarily being that special interest, but more around that expression of self, of language, of in this case, haven't they done well?
Yeah, I treat it as a meaningful communication attempt. So I responded with, "Yes, well done, Henry." And he looked at me and smiled as if to say, "She gets it." Because I then had to walk away and unpick it for a little while. But then once I'd unpicked it and thought it through, I tested that hypothesis by going back with a "Nice one, Henry," for something else. And suddenly this young man looked at me and smiled, and we had a little brief dialogue. So sometimes it's okay. I'm going to honour that. I'm going to treat it as you are communicating. I'm going to give it value. Let's do some serve and return and see where it takes us. I think that's really important, and not just to dismiss it as, "Oh, here we go again." It's that special interest. And you said something really interesting, that some practitioners might think, "I need to get away from this and get them into something else."
Yes.
But for me, if I'd have done that yesterday, I would have completely devalued his attempt at communication. But I might also have taken away a security blanket. Maybe Horrid Henry is the thing that works for him and makes him feel safe and okay to be able to communicate, because that's something he's familiar with and secure with. So sometimes it's about us joining that child in their world of communication, meeting them right where they are and staying there for a bit, and then gradually eking in a little bit more and working from that unique starting point.
Completely. Absolutely. And I think, when we kind of finished the last episode with once you've met one individual, whatever it might be, you've met one individual. And I think it comes back down to, there is going to be an element of this trial and error. And this idea, like you've rightly pointed out, you've observed, you've listened, you've gone away and thought about it. But right, let's test this hypothesis. And I think, that's important to say to practitioners, isn't it? It's the fact that they're not going to get it right all of the time.
And I think there's times I can think of it, I've got it horribly wrong. But the beauty of that is that child tells me instantly, because I get the back turns and then, "No, we're not doing this, thank you. Go away and have another think, woman." But then again, I've learned something, haven't I? So rather than feel defeated, I think, okay, it's not that. What else could it be? How is this child trying to communicate with me? So it's great to have these theories, but then we have to test them. And what's the worst that's going to happen? It's not going to work. Okay. We now know that. That's good.
Absolutely. And I think, building on that kind of that non-verbal side, I mean, what about the use of things like AAC devices and kind of the role that they play in the classroom?
Yeah, I think they're really important. Our augmentative and alternative communication systems can be things like objects, symbols, charts, photos, high-tech iPad apps that speak on behalf of the child that they program. And it can be as simple as signing. I think we've got to be careful here that we only assume that those things are for non-verbal children, but actually they can be a wonderful complement for verbal children and children who are developing their communication skills, because it gives them that extra layer of getting my message across to you and limits frustration. And I also think when we talked about autism as a spectrum on a day, and I'm doing that because we're back to that circle approach and circling my finger, if your communication skills are dialed down on a particular day and you're aware of it, you can reach for your AAC device, however that is, and use that. So it doesn't have to be a day in, day out, that you can be a today I need it, tomorrow not so.
And it's building that toolkit, isn't it? And again, it comes back down to that individual, our role being there as that kind of facilitator, working out providing that.
Yeah, and being aware of a lot of people come to me and say, yeah, but they're going to rely on that then, so the communication skills won't develop. And we have to get that out of our heads, because actually our augmentative and alternative communication systems are actually, if you like, the icing on the cake, a complement. So it's viewing it slightly differently.
What about supporting, creating of those routines and structure and the importance that plays?
Yeah, I think in terms of communication, to get good communication skills, we have to not be scared or anxious. If in the back of our mind we're, oh, this is horrible, we're not going to communicate effectively. And we've all had it happen. I've had it happen when I've spoken at a conference and suddenly spotted somebody important in the room and then just been a brother and goes, oh my goodness, so I can't communicate. But if I've got good systems around me that give me security, routine, actually this is safe, I'm used to it, I'm going to be more likely to communicate. And they've got to have a magic silver bullet for this. You haven't. It's as simple as a really good, consistent visual timeline, a good, consistent approach. It is back to basics. Those are the things that were required. And what's brilliant with those things, they're not just good for your autistic children. They are vital for some, but valuable for all.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good place to kind of end to today's podcast. This episode is on the fact that actually, it's building what we've said across the series, that actually the support that we're putting in for our young people with differences isn't just good for our young people with those differences. It's good for all of our children. Beccie, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to say a huge thank you to our guest, Beccie, for joining us and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTF's Talking Educators podcast with me, Mark Loveday, and Beccie Hawes. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your settings and links to relevant resources.